Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Sequel Q&A. My name's Doug. So the next sequel that we're going to be covering is our second boxing sequel. Unfortunately, the first one was Teen Wolf 2. Not really unfortunately. It was a lot of fun to cover, and it's Jason Bateman as a wolf boxing. But it's the first time that we're going to be diving into the Rocky franchise. And we're starting at the end, Rocky 5. Man, I have not seen this movie in its entirety in so many years, maybe since I was like a kid. So it's going to be so much fun to discuss with Jamie and our Munchie expert, Nick Sperdone. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But what I love most about it is it led me to this week's guest, cinematographer Steven Poster. And man, I had so much fun talking with him, just talking about his beginnings and how he fell in love with still photography, a neighbor that moved next door that really just set everything in motion for him. And then along the way, he had so many times that it could have been over his career, but the dominoes fell in the right place, or he knew somebody that knew the right person. And wow, his filmography, just look it up. I'll put his IMDb and any links of his in the episode notes. And on the website, he sent me some really cool behind the scene photos that'll be on his dedicated page, sequelsonly.com. That'll be /Steven Poster. So you can check it out all there. But man, he worked on Strange Brew, Blade Runner, Big Top Pee-wee, Donnie Darko, Basketball, Rocky 5. He has a lot to talk about that one and just so much more. And then now the fact that full circle, he's teaching now where he started, back when he was a kid. So it's really cool. He's be able to teach the next generation of cinematographers and directors of photography, which he taught me. Same thing. They just interchange it. But he has a funny story about that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to start the interview, but first, if you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe wherever you're listening. Rate us 5 stars. It helps us grow and helps other people check out these amazing interviews with some amazing individuals. And we have some really fun sequel reviews. So I'm going to shut my yapper. And here is cinematographer Steven Poster. Let's get started. I like talking about how people started. Not even just in the industry, because it's one of those industries that has like a huge failure rate. It's so hard to succeed in for the most part. But I like to find out how people got to that point. So where did you grow up? Was it outside of Chicago?
Yeah, I grew up outside of in the first suburb outside of Chicago. So it was virtually Chicago, and North Side. Chicago's 2 cities. It's the South Side and the North Side. So I was the North Side kid, and I got interested. This is here we are, the origin story.
I love that.
I got interested. Yeah, here you go. I got interested in photography when I was about 10. Nobody around me was an influence in terms of other than home movies or still photography, just family stuff and tourist stuff. But there was a guy on my block who had a darkroom, who happened to be the father of my best friend growing up. And he was his dad was an engineer, and he built his own enlarger and everything. I mean, he was like really, that kind of a guy. He had his woodworking shop and his darkroom. And in fact, what's very interesting is I've actually stayed in touch with my friend on and off over the years, and his family, when they were packing up their house, sent me his 4x5 graphic. Said it would be better in your hands than in their hands. So it was very sweet.
What'd you like to shoot as a kid?
Well, it who knows? Whatever was in front of me. But by the time I was 12, I mean, I really got interested in it. And of course, I had many hobbies. So my parents said, oh, this is just another one of those hobbies. In a couple months, he'll be done with it. Yeah, well, it's a couple months later. At 12 years old, somehow I knew photography was going to be my life. I didn't know what that meant. Was I going to be shooting weddings and bar mitzvahs all my life? Was I going to do school portraits? Was I going to do news? That's all I knew. I didn't know much beyond that. But I knew I liked it well enough to be this is something I could do. I could do for the rest of my life. And then when I was 14, well, I bought my first camera, my first serious camera after my bar mitzvah. Sorry, after my bar mitzvah, I took $100 of my money that I had gotten because that's what they give, a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I took $100. I went to a neighborhood camera store where I had kind of been hanging out, and he sold me a 1949 Rolleiflex, twin lens Rolleiflex, and that became my camera all through high school. I
Oh,
shot
wow.
with a Rolleiflex all through high school. And when I was 14, we had moved to a near suburb of Chicago, and I met a guy who drove up next door to my house, and there was an empty lot. And I saw that he had gotten out of a Jaguar, an old Jaguar. He had a beard, he smoked a pipe, he had a cap on, and he had a light meter on his belt. And I could see that from my front window. And I ran out and I said, "Hi, my name's Steve. I live there. What kind of light meter is that?" And he said, "Son, we'll have a lot of time to talk about that. I'm moving in. I'm building a house next door to you." And he was a CBS newsreel cameraman, a network cameraman in Chicago. And he also owned a small 16 millimeter laboratory where all the news film was processed. And, they'd edit it wet. It would have to go through the process, and they'd grab it off the reels and edit it pretty much wet just to get it on the air as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Um, so he owned that part of that laboratory, and he became my mentor. And he was a tough son of a bitch, and he really was an old Navy guy, but he was wonderful to me, and he insisted that I learn still photography before I even start to do anything with movies. And in those days, there wasn't video, there wasn't anything that we could do other than Super 8
Yeah.
that emulated film. And so I went to school at Southern Illinois.
I saw that. Salukis.
Yes, Salukis, there you go.
I'm a Knicks fan, so I don't know if was Frazier still there when you were there? Walt Clyde Frazier?
No, no, he was wasn't he gone by then? I think he was gone by then. I don't know. He might have been. It might have been before his time. No, but the Salukis, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what a Saluki is? It's a
No.
dog. It's a kind of dog. It's like a
Oh, I
little
should
a
know that
little
because that's the
gray.
logo. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a little greyhound, right? Of course, they had their team Salukis, and but I was there for 2 years, and in my freshman year, I was put in a program for classic high school underachievers, of which I was a star. Okay, because I underachieved in high school. There was no uh, movie classes. There was no still photography classes. There was barely an art class. And
Yeah.
and so I did things like I took shop class. I was the only Jewish kid in shop class, uh, but but I did that kind of stuff. It was more interesting to me. I was interested in theater. I was interested in music. I was interested in photography, and I did what I could to be the photographer for the school. My freshman principal called me Flash. Good reputation to have.
Yeah, right.
But having met Maury Bleckman, who moved in next door to me, the day I met him, I said, I want to be him.
Yeah.
I said, I want to be him. He is the coolest human being I've ever seen, and I want to be him. And I did my best to become him. In fact, I smoked a pipe for years. I had the beard. I wear caps.
Nice.
but Maury was a news shooter, and he never wanted me to shoot news. He thought my lot in life was far beyond shooting news. So he wouldn't let me get a job at the station, and which was
Wow.
okay, which
Yeah.
was fine because it worked out okay. And here's Ruthie. Ruthie will join us at times. She's got
Nice.
a bad case of FOMO. She wants to be involved in everything.
Yeah.
So that was it. And I went to Southern Illinois, and there was this program that I was put into because I was this classic underachiever in high school. If they had only taught stuff that I liked to learn or taught me how to learn, I was never taught how to learn. How do you know how to learn? It's not instinctive. It really isn't. So
Yeah.
I went into this program and I became a student, and I became. I mean, it was really, it was an experimental program done by the university, and we were in the most experimental section. We had 50 kids who were all underachievers, and our section was developed by the design department. And at that time, Buckminster Fuller, if you don't know who that is, look him up. Buckminster
No.
Fuller was
Well.
an artist in residence, amazing human being. And so that was my first year, and I really got excited about school and did very well after that. But it was arts based program, and I was able to do my photography and a little bit of cinematography. In my freshman year, I had a senior who was doing a TV show that was like a little filler show for the local PBS station, and we would go out every afternoon on Friday, every Friday afternoon. We would get a state car, a white state car, and we would drive around and do a show called Adventures Through Southern Illinois. And believe me, we had adventures. It was crazy. And I had a little Bell and House 70 DR wind up camera and a few rolls of 16 millimeter film and a still camera. And I would provide the visuals for the show as a freshman. So it was pretty remarkable. And we here's one quick story on that. We were my buddy who was the director. Um, was into Indian artifacts, and there's always stuff all around buried, toward near the Mississippi. So we were out on a bayou by the Mississippi, and I needed to study. I needed to a test coming up was on Monday, and I had to study something. So I was sitting in the car, and it was snake season. It was spring, so the snakes were out, and so my buddy had a gun that he had brought from home in case he ran into some monster snake, this macho guy. And he's up way up in the hills, and I'm sitting down by the levee and in this car, and all of a sudden I look up, and I'm surrounded by guys with shotguns and rifles and pistols. And I knew my friend was up in the hills with a gun. And somehow I said, "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" My buddy heard me, and so what happened was this was a posse coming out to look for two escaped prisoners. The prison was 10 miles down the road on the Mississippi, and we were the first thing the helicopter saw was this white car apparently abandoned next to the levee, right? And so the whole group came out with their, and it took us a while
Jesus.
to explain our way out of that. But
I
I mean,
bet.
he could have been shot if he had pulled that gun. It'd be like today. But
Yeah.
so those are the kinds of adventures we had on that show. That's just an aside. So okay, I left. I was very active in civil rights. And at that time, there was no support for that at that school because it was really a Southern school. And I had a little incident that said to myself, I'm getting out of here. And I had seen an advertisement in a magazine for Art Center College of Design in Hollywood, and that's all I needed. I didn't need to know much more. I knew they had a photography department, and I called them up, and I found a way to kind of expedite getting in. It took about 10 days. I got my parent transcripts there and everything, and they accepted me within 10
Wow.
days. And I say, okay, I'm out of Southern Illinois. And I ended up going to Hollywood, which I always wanted to do anyway.
Wow.
So I was in this strange and wonderful art school that had a very big reputation for automobile design. In fact, it is the premier, still to this day, the premier auto design school in the world, and is
Oh,
supported
wow.
by all the manufacturers. It really is. Every car has a piece of art center in it. Everything that's ever designed, because they all come out of there. But they also had a very good still photography department, and I learned in the very first week. I learned more about light than I had ever learned in 10 years of being a photographer. It was a remarkable teacher, a guy named Charlie Potts, and he eventually became the head of the photography department. But he had a way of teaching how to see light that it was so unique that it shook me up. I mean, it was like a revelation to me.
Wow.
And the first 6 weeks were, I mean, it was just so filled with wonderful experiences of this kind of learning. In fact, I now teach at Art Center. I
Yeah,
teach
you were saying that's
two,
wild.
yeah, two classes at Art Center, and I do Charlie's first lecture every year. I,
Oh,
I, I reproduce his first lecture, and everybody loves it. It's a real informative piece.
that's
So I do
special.
that
Like
every
that
year.
full
Yeah,
circle.
it's fun.
Wow. So how long were you there? Did you have like it was a traditional like 2 more years left, or how many years left did you have
No,
there?
I stayed. I actually stayed. I stayed for 3 semesters. And the reason I left, I went back to Chicago and got into the Institute of Design at Illinois Institute of Technology, and they had a photography department to finish up and get my degree because I had to get a degree because of my mother.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily need one, but I got one.
Yeah.
And when I graduated, I handed her the diploma. I said, "Here, this is yours." but I left California, not not too smart of a move, but I left California to go back to Chicago because of a woman. You know,
That's the
you,
story for
you fall in
everyone.
love, and that's it. That's it. And she was a student at University of Wisconsin, and I was a student at IIT. And I did two or three times a week I would drive to Madison, Wisconsin, from Chicago to visit her.
That's
It
a
was
far ride,
19.
isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, it's a couple hours. You
Okay.
know, midnight, snowing, windows
Yeah.
open. Stay awake, stay awake. Uh, and fortunately, I didn't drink or anything in those days. We were presumably in love. I got engaged to her and was gonna marry her, but I never did. Um, but I was in school. I had this little film that I had shot for a class at Southern. I remember it was something about gravity, something about science and gravity and whatever. I showed that to a company called Film Group, which was a boutique commercial company based on cinema verite. It was a couple of guys who were documentarians who were getting into commercials. It was the early days for that, but and a still photographer and a cinematographer who was mostly doc and news guy. None of them knew how to light. Well, they looked at the movie that I had done and said, "Well, you know how to light." I said, "Yes, I do." I studied that. And they said, "Well, we're going to hire you as a cameraman." Here she comes again, back and forth. Yeah, we're going to hire you as a cameraman. So I said, "Okay, I'm a cameraman," and I never looked back. That
Yeah.
was it. And a week later, I shot my first commercial, national commercial for Kellogg's, 35 millimeter with a gear head. And this was a camera in a blimp. And it was a very complicated older camera. And I had to learn how to do it. The camera equipment came in on a Friday, and it came in like 35 cases all over the studio floor. And I spent all day and most of the evening on Friday and all day on Saturday putting that damn thing together. This little gear goes in here. I'm telling you, it was so, it was crazy. But I finished that by midnight on Saturday. And I had done it on the floor of the studio. And it was much too heavy for me to pick up and put on the dolly. So I ran out into the street. I found a stranger. I said, "Can you come in and help me? I got to lift something up." I brought this stranger in, and he lifted up onto the dolly. And then all day Sunday, I practiced with the wheels. And on
Wow.
Monday, I shot my first national commercial. So the moral of that story, if there is a moral to that story, is be bold and pretend you can do anything.
Yeah, fake it till you make it. Really, that's all
Exactly,
you got to do.
exactly.
Wow. So, what year ballpark would this be? Like around like 67, like late 60s?
That job was in '66. Okay.
Okay.
And I went through and the summer of '67. I think I got that job in the fall, and then the summer of '67. It was the beginning of the hippie summer of love kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I lived in an apartment very close to Lincoln Park in Chicago, which is where a lot of the action happened. And that was like a turning point for a lot of stuff. And the company wasn't doing very well, so they eventually had to let me go. But I got a job working for a man named Herschel Gordon Lewis.
No, yeah.
If you don't know, you know who Herschel was?
Yeah, like
The
horror.
king,
Yeah.
gore, gore. He
Yeah,
invented the
I
word
interviewed
gore.
one of his like inspirations proteges, this guy Joe Castro that had
Oh, sure.
Herschel. Yeah, you know Joe?
I knew Joe. Yeah. I mean, we
Okay, yeah.
met.
So he had her yeah, he had Herschel in one of his last like Terror 2 movies, and he like he like dedicated the film to it, and he was like the host of it throughout the thing, like introducing these little short like horror things. Look at that. Wow.
Ah, great. Herschel was a real con. He was great. He he um, he hired me to work on his movies that summer, and I think we did like three movies in the summer. It's like, and I had to go stop at the butcher shop in the morning to pick up the gore, the parts, the animal parts
Yeah.
that we used for the horror stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Amazing. Were you into horror at all at that point?
I learned.
You learned, right?
I got into it. In fact, my first two legitimate feature films were both horror films, Blood Beach and Dead and Buried.
Yeah.
It was the genre of the era.
Yeah, it was. You got to think 60s, 70s. That's when it really like
Yeah,
kicked off, like
yeah,
really
yeah.
kicked into high gear.
So I was in Chicago 67, 68 for the convention, and my girlfriend was up in Madison, and she was a Trotskyite, is what she was. That she was living with the young socialists, okay, and they were great. And there was so much action going on in Madison. It was a very interesting time. It was a very interesting time everywhere.
Yeah.
Everything that happened in Chicago was based on the cops were in control, and you had to be careful no matter what you said or what you did.
Yeah.
They were out gunning for you. But I had this developing career of commercials, industrials, documentaries. I did some documentary work with a friend of mine who's still a friend of mine, Gary Sherman, who I did my second movie for, Dead and Buried, and of which, by the way, there is a really a good re-release of Dead and Buried that's a Blu-ray. It just came out
Oh yeah,
this month or month of yeah. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. I like
that's
that movie.
awesome.
I think we did some very interesting shooting in that movie.
So I have like your IMDb like printed out. So like one of the earliest ones on there, and it really caught my eye because it's a great movie. And I interviewed Joe Alves, who was the production designer on Close
That's right. You
Encounters of the
said you
Third
did.
Kind.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So that was like
yeah.
your
Great.
first like. Would you say that's your first like big like Hollywood job? That movie?
No, before that, I was doing television. I was doing television at Universal. What happened was I in 1974, I think it was 73 and 74. I had a little group of friends. One of them was a writer director, and we would do these productions, these industrial shows and stuff. And I was making a living, not a big one, but I was making a living. I was doing commercials and doing whatever, jobbing around Chicago. And after about 5 years, I got in the union, thanks to my friend Maury, who helped me get in the union, and became a union cameraman. And then I was able to do some operating for people and whatever. But we were going to, my friend Mick, who was the writer director, was going to, we were going to do a feature film. Say hello. Come here.
Hello.
Let me show you. Let me see that. There she is. She's got a face.
Hey.
Okay, go away. Go away. You're such a pest. We were going to do a feature film in Chicago, and my friend had written a script, which I think to this day is a good script. I mean, he was a really good writer and had many opportunities to come out to California, and never wanted to. But he had written 7 or 8 scripts by that time, and they were good. So we were going to try and raise money and shoot this movie. And we got to the point where it was about 75% funded. We were going for $750,000, and we were going to shoot in Wisconsin. And we had a cast. We had hired a casting director, and we committed to an actress, and we raised a certain amount of money, and then the stock market crashed, and our money fell out. Within 24 hours, we were gone, and
Oh my gosh.
terribly depressed. And I kind of had burned my bridges in Chicago, and they said, I'm going to make a feature here. And then I said, I'm going to go to Hollywood,
Yeah.
whatever. I sort of burned all the opportunities I had. But we started to travel to Los Angeles. I started to get on a plane and go out here and start to meet people, and try and develop some relationship. There was a commercial director who had moved to Hollywood, who hired me quite a bit when it got me back and forth, and a great crazy guy. I mean, remember, this was I moved out there officially in 1975. So 1975 through about 1980, early 80s, was a pretty wild time. And I live in Laurel Canyon, and I moved into Laurel Canyon when I first moved to Los Angeles, which, was the music canyon, the hippie canyon.
Yeah.
And it was just a wonderful time out here. Very exciting until it wasn't anymore, but it was. I still live in Laurel Canyon. I had done a job in Chicago. I did somebody a favor. Here's how this works, because this is important, because this tells you that if you're nice to people, not nice to cats, but if you're nice to people, uh, you will reap the benefits eventually. So I had done a favor in those days, in fact, it was an assistant director who moved to California, who was doing Universal Television work. He was in the first DGA training program out here to become an assistant director. And he called me up one day. This is a guy I worked with on Herschel Gordon Lewis stuff. He called me up and said, "Listen, there's these kids moving to Chicago. I know you got an extra room. Put him up for a few days. He's starting dental school, and she's going to need a job and everything." So, like we did in those days, in those hippie days, you don't ask questions. Here shows up a young couple, had just gotten married. He's going to dental school. We had this loft back room, bedroom, which they lived in. They stayed with us for 3 weeks, and my wife helped her find a job. We helped them find an apartment. I mean, it's just what you do. In those days, that's what you
Yeah.
do. You meet somebody fun, and then you. So next thing I knew is I got a call from Universal Studios. The first call was for they wanted me to work on the Sting 2. Sting 2 was done partially in Chicago, and Jeremy Kagan was directing, but I didn't know that at the time. Jeremy is now one of
Yeah.
my best friends.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Oh,
Because of that.
I'm friends with his, well, I don't know. They had a relationship in the 70s, but Larry Hankin was in one of Kagan's movies in the 70s. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
Carl
Well,
Gottlieb wrote The Sting too, or was in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's one of his buddies. But
Yeah.
matter of fact, I shot three things for Jeremy.
Wow.
And he's a fabulous director, just wonderful director. But he's now head of the graduate directing school at USC. That's what he does. So I got this call to do Sting, and on it I met, and since I was in the union, I could go out there as an operator. Of course, they weren't going to let me touch a camera, but it was like a gift, and I had no idea why. But it turned out that the kids that stayed at my house were the son and daughter-in-law of Henry Bumstead. Bummy, as he was affectionately known, was one of the top 2 production designers in Hollywood.
Wow.
Hitchcock, Clint Eastwood, on down the line. Fabulous, fabulous work. And Sting 2, which was one of his. And so they just did me a favor. They just, said, "Here, give this kid 3 days." He did a nice thing for my son.
Wow.
And the next thing I know, I got a call from my buddy who had set this up in the first place, and he said, "You're going to get a call from a production manager about doing a TV movie in Chicago." I said, "Great! This is how this stuff pays off." So I get a call I'm thinking they're going to want me on the camera crew somehow. So I got a call from a production manager, kind of a real salty guy, and he said, "We heard good stuff about you, and we'd like to hire you as a location manager." I said, "Okay, I'm a location manager. What is that?" I didn't know shit, right?
Yeah.
And so I accepted the job. Fortunately, I was connected politically in the city because my then mother-in-law, not the woman that I was with from University of Wisconsin, she
Yeah.
abandoned me. She left me a month before the wedding. It was very difficult. But a year later, I got married, and my mother-in-law was very connected socially to a lot of the city pals and stuff. So I had connections, and I was able to do this job as a location manager. It's a miserable job, by the way. It is a hard job to do, especially if you don't know what you're doing. But I accomplished it, and they helped me out, and it was a very successful shoot. The director of the piece, it was a pilot that never went. The director of the piece was a vice president of Universal Studios for television. And he said to me when they were leaving, he said, "Kid, when you get to Hollywood and you got your union ticket out there, give me a call." Okay, thank you very much. These are the connections. You don't know from day to day who you help out may be
Yeah.
your boss tomorrow. You just don't know that stuff. So many acts of kindness will help your career, I guarantee you. But I got to California. There was a union problem, even though I was a member of the union in Chicago and an officer. They didn't want any of us out there. It was a closed door situation. And I called the business manager of the union. At that time it was 659 International Cinematographers Guild. But I called him up and I said, "Jerry, hi, my name's Steven Poster. I'm vice president of Chicago Local, and I'm moving to California." He said, "You'll never work out here, and if you do, it'll be over my dead body," and then slammed the phone down. Nice reception. Oh, what do I do now? So, so I had one cousin, one relative, who was in the movie business as a distribution guy in Chicago for Allied artists. But he was the only one I knew. His name was Nat Nathanson. He was a very sweet guy, but he worked for Allied artists and whatever. So I called him up. I said, "Nat, what do I do? The guy shut me out. I don't know. I got to go to." So he said, "I'll call you tomorrow." So he called me tomorrow and he said, "Here's the name of a lawyer I want you to call." And he gave me the name of a lawyer in Hollywood. And I called this guy and he said, "What's the problem?" I said, "Well, I want to transfer into the union in Hollywood." And the guy that I talked to on the phone slammed the phone down on him. He said, "You'll never work in Hollywood." He said, "What's his name?" I said, "Jerry Smith." He said, "Hey, I'm playing golf with him tomorrow. I'll take care of it." Literally. Okay.
That's insane.
So there was a workaround where they let me become my corporation become a signature to the union, and they were doing that so that they could prove to the people that were suing them for membership that, you see, people do get in. So I was a shill. I just happened to walk into it at the right time, and I didn't know
Yeah.
that. And I think for years there were people who resented me for having done that, but I didn't know. I know.
Yeah.
But okay. So I got my union ticket, and I was able to work. And I called Richard Irving, the producer and the vice president of Universal. I said, "Richard, I've got my union ticket. I'm ready to go." 3 weeks later, I had a show. My first television show at Universal, which was called Class of '65, and it had already been on for quite some time. And it was only the last couple of shows that they were going to do, but it was my first work on a studio lot.
Wow.
And it was thrilling. It was just just a wonderful experience. I learned a tremendous amount too. I politically, I had no idea. The director was very difficult and was trying to scapegoat me. No, that never happens in Hollywood. But I learned very quickly that in fact my crew was protecting me. They realized when I first got out there, I had this crew that had been working together, and the director was taking a lot of time, was way behind, and they called him on the carpet and said, "Why are you taking so much time?" He said, "Well, I got this inexperienced cameraman. What does he know? He's taking all this time. It's not me, it's him." And they said, which is illegal to do today, they said, "No, sorry, we've been keeping track of the setups, and he's doing 7 minutes per setup per turnaround, and you're doing about a half hour or better. Now, tell us what's wrong." So the script supervisor saved my job.
Wow.
They had asked her. They had asked her to keep track, and she literally saved my job. Now it's illegal to do now, from what I understand. The Directors Guild won't won't let won't let anybody keep track of that stuff. But there it was. I would have been fired. My career would have been over at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, this kid comes in from Chicago. He doesn't know anything, and he's fired. Right?
Yeah.
Every step along the way is treacherous.
That's crazy.
That's something that your audience should learn about Hollywood. Not only Hollywood, but life. Everything is treacherous. There's always somebody who wants to get you for whatever reason. Who knows? And I'm a nice guy, I'm fun to work with. But there it was, all along the way. You learn these lessons. Most of them the hard way.
So you're on that 65, the class of 65.
Class of 65. It lasted, for the last two shows, and it was a great experience. It really was. And I went on from there to do some TV movies, and then I was on this horrible TV movie that I actually got fired on for no good reason, just because the producer was one of these guys who wanted to fire somebody.
Yeah.
They made up an excuse, but it was Rich Man, Poor Man. It was the sequel to the sequel of Rich Man, Poor Man, which was a TV show that in those days. And I said, that's it. I'm not doing any more television. I want to do features. I'm sitting down until I get my first feature. And 2 months later, I had my first feature, which was Blood Beach.
Wow.
So, yeah, and that was quite an experience. I wish we could remaster that one, because it's actually kind of funny. It was the idea was there was a worm from outer space that burrowed itself under Santa Monica Beach and would suck people under the sand and eat them. Hey, what can I tell you?
Hey, that was that era, the Roger Corman and all those just creatures.
Yeah. In fact, Roger Corman, I didn't work on Roger Corman, and I think that was a big mistake that I didn't. I didn't because Roger Corman was non-union. I was very union oriented. In those days, you couldn't work non-union. Now you can, as long as you tell us you're doing it. But I think my career would have advanced much faster had I have had the experience of working on Roger Corman films.
Oh,
First
wow.
of all, you create a community. All of those people from all those films in that era are a community, and second of all, you get experience that you couldn't get any other way. So I missed. I'm sorry I never worked for Roger Corman.
But I think it worked out because, like, right at that point, when you look at your IMDb, like one I wanted to ask you about. There's a bunch I want to ask you about, but not like remembering, like, hey, how'd you set up this shot or anything like that. But like, I think it's always funny, the outliers on people's IMDb's. Like,
I love those.
Gallagher. how'd you come about working on a Gallagher it was a stand-up special?
Yeah, that's on my IMDb. Yeah. Really?
Yep.
As what? What does it say about it?
Camera operator?
Yeah, well, I guess that's what I did, but it was what happened was I don't remember a whole lot about it. It was a very druggy time.
Just watermelons were harmed during.
Yeah, well, I know. I remember him and doing it. What happened was my wife at the time, my first wife, who I married in Chicago, had become the art director for that show. And I was hanging around, so I got to operate the camera for Bill. It was the director. His name just went out of my head, but really nice guy from Detroit originally, and I did some operating for him on that. I'm surprised it's on there.
It is, yeah.
It's
Well,
interesting.
usually
Yeah.
there's probably a lot on here. If you looked on your own, we're not going to obviously go through it all.
Are you on IMDb Pro or IMDb?
Well, I have both. Does one have more
Oh,
than the
okay.
other?
Well, I think that because I haven't seen it on Pro. And by the way, here's a nice IMDb Pro.
That's fancy.
Yeah,
That's
I
how I
did
got
some
your. That's how I got in contact with you. I went on IMDb Pro.
good, good. It's an
Yeah.
amazing program. I mean, it's like I couldn't operate without it. It's just so amazing. The depth of information that you get from that is just great. There are a few programs like that are indispensable, but IMDb Pro is definitely one of them. So
Oh
really, it
yeah.
was on there. So what else do you want to ask me about?
Oh no, just like it seems like that point. There's always like it's so funny. All those dominoes that happen throughout your career, like just so happens that that lawyer was playing golf and just these little things that were happening. But like from there, it looked like it took off. Like '82, you have Blade Runner, Best Little Whorehouse in
Second
Texas.
unit, second
Yeah,
unit.
all these things. Yeah, but all these things
Yeah,
happening in a row, and you worked on so many cool movies. Like I told you when we talked a few minutes on the phone a few weeks ago, when I talked about David Snyder, was like Blade Runner, next year Strange Brew. So there's like all these great movies that you worked at during that era.
yeah, yeah. Strange Brew was one of the most fun things I've ever done.
My buddy,
I've always, yeah.
it's one of my buddy's favorite movies, and he wanted to ask about the mouse and the beer bottle in that opening scene. I don't know if you were there for that one,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
there's
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, of course. I'm just trying to remember what they did. I think they split the
Yeah.
bottle on the seam and put it back together again. Aren't going to force the mouse into the.
Yeah.
You know that Molson Beer was going to sponsor the whole show, and then they heard about the gag of the mouse in the bottle, and they turned around and shunned us. So we couldn't shoot in the Molson Brewery. We couldn't do anything. We had to go out to a little brewery in Western Canada that was an independent to shoot the beer scenes in that movie. But
Wow.
that was fun. I laughed for 4 months straight. It was just wonderful working with those guys. What a shame that they've not done another one. I just saw Dave. I did a documentary that reproduced scenes from a documentary for a friend of mine last year about an improv person who invented a lot of the world of improv. Del
Who, Del
Close. It
Harris?
was
Oh, Del
Del
Close. Del
Close.
Close. Yeah.
Yeah, crazy man, crazy.
Yeah.
By the way, the documentary is on Netflix. It's
Oh,
called
cool.
for Mad Men Only, and
Oh, I
I
gotta check it
just
out. I
did
love
some.
improv.
Oh well, this he invented so much of it.
Yeah.
Wait till you hear how if you know anything about improv, you know that one of the techniques that an improv troupe will do is called the herald,
Yep.
where you ask the audience for three subjects and you do a skit about those three subjects. Well, the herald was an idea that he came up with, and everybody liked it. And he said, "But you know what? We have to have a name for it. What are we going to call this?" And somebody in the group said, "Well, Harold's a nice name." He says, "Okay, we'll call it Harold." That
Harold's a nice
was
name,
it.
like naming a kid.
Yeah, right, right. But Strange Brew was just remarkable. I mean, those guys were so funny.
I watched it a few weeks ago, and it's the whole opening sequence is so cool. Like when you're watching a movie within a movie when they're in the theater, it's just so cool because even the camera looks different. So I don't know, it's
Yeah,
something pretty unique. I don't know if anybody tried that up to that point, but you saw like behind the curtain sort of. You were like in the movie like with the audience. It was pretty neat.
yeah, yeah. It was fun. It was fun. And then the mouse in the bottle, and then the moths in the bottle, and everything. I mean, it was so clever. It was Hamlet, by the way. It was Shakespeare, and those
Yeah.
guys were Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. That was their ostensible role. And one thing happened after another, and I ended up marrying Pam, my second
Really?
wife. Yeah, yeah. I was married to her for about 4 years.
Oh my
It was
God.
my actress phase. But yeah, thought she was Canadian. She was different enough, and that I thought maybe it would work out. But of course it didn't. Um,
What would you say? Like, there's always like that turning point. I know when you were young, you were like, "This is what I'm gonna do forever." Was there like a film that you worked on that gave you that like, I don't know, gravitas that people were like, "Oh, he worked on blank," or "He worked with blank"? Was there anything that gave you that edge?
I think having worked with Ridley Scott gave me a lot of credibility.
Yeah.
And that didn't come till Blade Runner when I was doing second unit on Blade Runner. But and I was there. That was another fluke that happened. I got called in to do 1 day. My agent got me in to do 1 day to shoot the spinner, the car going through the White Tunnel.
Yeah.
That was the only shot, one shot. And apparently they had tried it 3 other times, and the studio was really pissed off. And they said, "We don't know why we're doing it again, but it's something he didn't like." Everybody hated Ridley at that point. But on that movie, things have turned around now because he now you know has done enough movies in America that he knows how good the crews are over here. But at that point, there was a lot of tension between the crew and Ridley. But I came in, for about 4 weeks, but what happened was I was hired for the 1 day, and then he liked the work that I had done. I solved the problem for him, even though I didn't know what quite was the problem.
Yeah.
And so he kept me around, and every night we would do entire scenes, like the whole scene in Joanna Cassidy's uh, dressing room where Harry gets beat up, and
Yeah.
then he chases her down the street and shoots her. But that we did that all in one night. The interior of that,
Wow.
and then there was lots of visual effects stuff that I was doing. It was great. It was just great to be there. I was there for about 4 weeks, I think.
Yeah. Looking at that, and then like Starman, pretty awesome movie, and then even like Big Trouble in Little China, like working with Carpenter. That's
This house that I'm in now
Is it John Carpenter's old house?
was Adrienne Barbeau's house, and when he was married to her.
Oh, I interviewed her ex like last year. Steven Van Zant's brother, Billy Van Zant, was married to Adrienne Barbeau.
Oh, was that really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't buy it directly from her. There was somebody in between, but this was their house. Part of the
Hey,
fog
that's
was shot
cool.
in this house. Yeah,
What?
yeah, yeah. They did it. Not, they did some scenes out on the deck. There's a pool out that door there somewhere.
That's
Out
pretty awesome.
there's a pool. Yeah, but this
Holy
was her
crap.
house. Yeah, yeah. And in fact,
Amazing.
not only that, not only did I work for him on Starman and on Big Trouble in Little China, but Tommy Lee Wallace was his
Oh,
production
I love
designer
him.
and school buddy, and I did a movie with him, Aloha Summer, I think it's called.
Oh, sweet. No, I like Tommy Lee Wallace. He's
Yeah,
great.
and I did a movie with Nick Castle, who was the third guy in their rock band. Nick
Yeah.
Castle, Tommy Lee Wallace, and John Carpenter. So inadvertently worked with all three of them. Yeah, in one
And
capacity or
then
the other.
like, oh yeah, here I see Aloha Summer. But like even at that point, like we talked about like the Gallagher. I know you just did that because the your girl was the art director, but you have a Madonna video. You worked on a Madonna
That's
video.
I shot like a prayer.
Amazing.
You know, they I hadn't been doing a lot of music videos, although I did a lot of them. They weren't even called music videos in Chicago in the early days. Different bands and things. I did a lot of music stuff, and I got hired to do this Madonna video. I think Bill Pope did a lot of them, and he wasn't available. He was married to the producer, and he wasn't available. He's a fabulous shooter, by the way. They needed somebody to do kind of classy Hollywood type lighting and to make her look different. Remember, she had dark hair in it, and
Yeah.
so I got hired, and we shot for 3 days. It was wonderful. I didn't know that it was going to be controversial. What did I know? Yeah,
Yeah.
you stick a little nail in the hand, and there's some blood that comes out. I said, "Yeah, we're gonna burn some crosses up on San Pedro Hills. The whole bay could see it, right? Controversial, I guess. I didn't know. What did I know from stigmata or from burning
Yeah.
crosses? So, okay, fine, let's do it.
And like you worked on a few sequels over the years, but like the one I wanted to talk to you about was Rocky Five, which was when I guess at the time I was 4 at the time, but even when I was younger, watching all of them in a row, you get to that fifth one, it's such a
Yeah,
different movie. But that's what the sequel. You have to change. There has to be something. He can't just be that normal Rocky.
they screwed up. The studio screwed up. Sly screwed up. He was supposed to die in that movie. He was supposed to die in that street fight, and
Really?
that would have made it. That would have made it an absolute fucking classic. Because it's not a bad movie. It just was the
No.
only Rocky, that didn't make any money. But but they changed. They said, "Oh well, we don't want to kill off our asset," and it really was a bad decision because it would have been people would have flocked to that movie to see it
Wow.
if he had died. Yeah, yeah. So that's it's the luck of the draw.
Yeah, but when you started in that movie, it was already like started filming in the script. He was supposed to die, and then during they changed it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So and in fact, I made a mistake getting hired on that movie, and not not a mistake doing the movie, but a mistake because I was doing an additional unit or a new ending for Tango and Cash for another Stallone movie, and
Yeah, I love
we
that
were out in the
movie.
desert. We were out in the desert shooting, and Sly came out of his trailer and walked up to me and said, "Hey, how'd you like to shoot Rocky Five?" And I said, "I'd love to. That would be fun. What does the director think?" He says, "Oh no, he loves you. He wants to work with you." Well, it was John Avildsen who directed the first one, and
Yeah.
John fancied himself a cinematographer too, by the way. And I, it's a classic. We had to after Tango and Cash. A couple of weeks later, we had to do some screen tests for Sly to find the kid that was going to be the kid in the movie for him.
Yeah.
And at that time, it wasn't his son. And so we were on this empty stage, this big empty stage at Warner Brothers, and there was a little two-wall set that we were going to use to do. It was right in the middle of the stage, and these stages, I don't know if you've ever been on a Hollywood stage. They're vast, okay, and dark, and a big open volume of space. And the stage door opened, and this big streak of sunlight comes in, and this guy is silhouetted back there, and he starts walking toward us. And by the time he got halfway to me, I could sense that he hated my guts. And that was John Avildsen. Seriously, that's exactly exactly how it happened. And he made my life miserable to the point where my longtime gaffer at that point, who was a kind of legend in the business himself, a wonderful, wonderful, talented man, but had been in the business long enough to be pretty, somewhat irascible at times. And John Avildsen would come in late every single morning. And he had his method. What he would do was he would give us a shot to set up the night before, especially if we were on stage. And then he would come in the morning late, and because he was up all night editing and doing whatever, who knows. And he would come in and he'd say, "That's not what I told you to do. Tear it up. Let's start over again." And we would have to tear up what he said and go in and do a few close-ups before lunch and come back after lunch and do the exact shot that we had set up. But that was his method for being making it okay that he was late.
Jesus.
Well, he came in one morning toward the very end. I think there were 3 weeks left. And at this point, I mean, I was getting sick. I just didn't even want to be there. And he said, "I don't know. I don't know what you do. You take so much time. You're terrible. You blah 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 blah. And every time I come in, there's something wrong." And my gaffer said out loud to him in front of the crew, "Well, if you come in on time and be more professional." That was it. I knew that I was fired that day, and I was, in fact. And
really?
Else finished.
How far into the shoot?
Somebody, well, it was 3 weeks to the end. I had done over 50 days.
Oh my gosh!
So yeah. So these are Hollywood stories. Nobody talks about being fired.
Hollywood stories. Well, he's always done crazy stuff because he did the Karate Kid, right?
Yeah.
So during the shooting of that, again, it worked out for the movie, but Ralph Macchio at the time was like 17, or I don't know how old he was for the first one. I think he was a little bit older. He was still pretty young, yeah. But he isolated him, made him stay in his own trailer, so that animosity was real. I interviewed one of his buddies in the movie that got all of his lines cut, but he was a pretty cool guy. But he was telling me Ralph would be in this one trailer and he wouldn't hang out with the Cobra Kai, so it was real, he really hated them. So obviously it worked out, but
Avildsen was not a nice man. That's all I got to say. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about more funner projects. So I wanted to ask, what is the difference? So when you look on your IMDb, there's cinematographer and director of photography. What's the difference between those two? Same
no
exact
difference.
thing? Oh, okay.
Same exact thing. And in fact, on my next movie, may it be soon, I want to be titled as cinematographer, not as director of photography, because I promised Vittorio Storaro, because he has a thing he says, "We're not directors, we're cinematographers." And he said, you should tell everybody they should be called cinematographers, not directors. And I said, but it's a contractual thing. It's with the contractual thing with the producer. No, I don't care. You should tell the producers not to do it. So I promised him on my next feature I was going to be have the title of cinematographer.
And then on jobs that you go in and it's additional photography, for basketball, the Matt Stone and Trey Parker movie. What is that?
That's 3-4 days of shooting some section that they didn't get during production, and they do additional photography during that time. So I think I was there for 4 days, 3 or 4 days. I don't remember, but we got to work with them, and that was fun.
That's a wild movie,
and
really funny.
It's a director or a second unit director of photography is there for most of the production. And you get sent out to do stuff every day or every other day or whatever. But but when you just come in for a few days afterwards and cover for somebody, that's called additional photography.
All right. You taught me that. Do you have like a favorite? Obviously there's a lot of things on here. Do you have like a favorite? I would say like one shot, but is there a scene that you shot that would be like the quintessential like Steve Poster like scene?
I would consider the whole movie of Donnie Darko.
Oh yeah, I was about to ask that. Yeah.
A very important movie for me, artistically. Not just because it was a cult classic and everybody loves it and everybody knows it and whatever. And, and I could walk into an audience in any college and say, how many people have seen Donnie Darko? And many hands raised. But no, it was because I had decided to try something that I had been wanting to do for a long time. I'm a very technical guy, and I know a lot about technology, and I'm constantly working on new stuff and involved. I did the third digital intermediate ever done, the second in America, and the third to be done in the world.
Wow.
I do new stuff like that every time. And on Donnie Darko, I wanted to change my methodology. I wanted to change my emotional tone. And what I did was I worked much more intuitively. I worked from here as opposed to here. And that changed a lot for me. So as late as that was in my career, it really was a very major project for me. Working with Richard Kelly was a dream. I don't know why he hasn't done another movie in a number of years, but just one of the best directors I've ever worked with, and just an exciting man to work with in terms of what we have together. To me, Donnie Darko was essentially a change up for me, and that's fun. There are others. There are others definitely. I think there's some really iconic shots in Dead and Buried, if you get a chance to see it, and that
I'm gonna
was
check those out.
my second movie. But there's some really iconic shots that we were left up in Mendocino County with no adult supervision for 4 months. In
Wow.
what was that, 1979, something like that.
Yeah.
You know, that's a pretty bold move for a production company.
Yeah.
we
4 months.
we had very little supervision, and we did it on time and on budget. There was nothing they could argue about. But we were there for 4 months. You know, it's an interesting movie.
I gotta check those out. And then I see like you have some new things coming up or recently came out. Is the Miles Davis documentary out already?
It's not distributed. We're looking for distribution. What happened there? My friend Chris Wilkinson, who was the second unit director on The River that I did for Mark Rydell and Vilmos Zsigmond, and so I worked very closely with Chris Wilkinson. He's an A-list writer. He's one of the A-list writers, and in town. One of the what they call the 10 A-list writers. But he was writing this movie about Miles Davis for HBO. Don Cheadle was going to star in it and I think
Wow.
direct it. And as part of the deal, he made a deal with HBO that he could do a documentary on Miles Davis. And so we had there's a jazz club out here called Catalina's, and on a Sunday morning, we brought 7 of Miles Davis's sidemen and friends to just sit around the table and bullshit about Miles in the old days and working in those days and being in jazz. And I had 2 cameras on it. we just covered it, and it turned out to be, the footage turned out to be very classic in terms of who and what, who was there and what they were saying. So it sat in the can for years because the documentary or the feature film had fallen apart from HBO. I think they eventually did something, but it wasn't the project that Chris did. So it sat in the can, and I finally, about a year ago, said, Chris, you got to do something with this. This is classical. These guys are dying off.
Yeah.
You want to be able to document them, and he did. And he did a good cut on it, and we're hoping that it will get picked up and do some distribution about it because it's a nice little movie.
I love that. No, Larry Hankin again. I'm helping him write his book, his memoirs, and he's going through this part of his career, and he was opening up for Miles Davis. And one of his stories was he was opening up for him because he had the same agent as Woody Allen. So Woody Allen's longtime manager got Larry hooked up with Miles, and they did a private show one time for the Kennedys. Way back.
Wow.
Larry was super young, but yeah, he has a funny story about Miles Davis actually paying attention to Larry's act and doing a joke about the Hells Angels, miming it while he was singing. I thought that was the coolest thing. And I saw that on there. I was like, oh, dude, that's awesome. And I love the way you just described it. Just his buddies and family sitting around, just shooting the shit. That's great.
It was really very fascinating, as a jazz fan when I was a kid, and so to be around it, it was wonderful.
Wow. So besides that, this is towards the end, I always like to ask folks. So I know obviously you always wanted to do photography. That was in your head, you were going to do something. Was there anything you already ever had in the back of your head, hey, you know what? If this doesn't work out, I can do blank.
If this didn't work out, I would have been fucked. That simple.
There was nothing your mom had?
Yeah, they wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer. They didn't care.
Yeah.
Jewish kid,
That's true.
I had to do something. But and they didn't. And actually, I have to say, I mean, they didn't understand. My dad was an immigrant, and my mom was second generation. But she was, they were middle class, middle class. Factory. My dad owned a factory, manufactured luggage. My mom did all the books for him and stuff. And they were working stiffs. So they didn't know what I was up to, and especially getting bad grades in high school. I mean, they had no idea. I was their son. They wanted me to do something appropriate.
Yeah.
Maury, my next door neighbor, was very helpful with them. He sat them down and said, yes, he can have a good career, and don't worry about him. He'll be fine. He's ambitious. And, he really smoothed the way for me.
That's great. That whole connection, throughout, when I listen back and edit this, or when people are listening to this, just those little dominoes that fell in the right way, it's pretty remarkable. Now, when you were on set, I know a lot of people, when you're in the moment, it's they always say, the last time you play, baseball with your neighborhood buddies, you never know when the last time's happening, So,
never know.
When you were on set of any movies, did you, grab any, keepsakes or any scripts? Do you keep any of that stuff?
You ready? I got something.
Yes.
Wait, I'm going to show you. And how many...
If it's Adrian Barbeau's bra,
No. How in touch with you are how many times have you seen Blade Runner, the original?
A lot of times, and then I watch it a few times where I talk to David. Okay.
You recognize this?
Oh my gosh, how did you keep that?
The mannequin hands. When the set dressing, they had all those mannequins. It says one of the hands from the mannequins. We use it as a doorstop.
Holy crap! How'd you get that? Just
I took it,
swiped it.
That's great. I told the set dressers. I always take a prop or something, and I always tell the set dressers.
Cool.
that I did, so
I love
yeah,
that.
so there it is.
Do you have the
Yeah.
mouse in the beer bottle?
No, I don't have that. What do I have anything from Strange Brew? Not that I remember. There must be something somewhere in a
That's
box.
great that you have that.
But
That's neat.
yeah, it's very cool. It's very cool. Here, I'll
Steven, this
show
has been
you
awesome.
another thing.
What
This
else
is
you got?
something I carry. What did I do? Okay, one more. One more.
This is awesome.
This you'll like. This you'll like. Hang on. Oh, here it is. Okay. This was, let's see if you can see it. This was the gift that we got. You see it?
That's awesome. Yeah.
You see? Yeah, Swiss Army knife, Blade Runner. It was a gift
That's
from the
awesome.
producers.
Oh my gosh. Steven, I'm so happy we connected. This has been so much
Me
fun.
too. This was
Really.
fun. Absolutely.
I love taking that trip down
Absolutely.
memory lane with folks. And I love, like I said before, and I'll say it again, like just that, how everything worked out. That phone call was to the right person and just unbelievable.
You never know.
No.
You never know. From day
They
to
always say,
day,
be
you
nice
never
on your
know.
way up. Because be
Yeah.
nice on your way up, because you're going to have to be people. You want people to be nice with you on your way down.
Right.
So, yeah.
As they climb over you. But
Yes.
but it's true. I mean, that's just my nature anyway, to be
Yeah.
helpful, and I like doing that. I mentor a lot of people around the world. In fact, I have a mentee that I worked with for years from India, from southern India,
Oh, wow.
and now he's a producer. In fact, he was Ang Lee's assistant and a location manager for Life of Pi,
Oh, wow.
and he's my
And
good
you were able to
friend,
tell
and
him what a location manager was.
well, I did, but but he was way ahead of me at that point. But
Yeah.
Samir, I years ago there was something now called CML, Cinematographers Mailing List, which is a group of cinematographers from around the world online who have discussion groups, and that was born out of an AOL group, and that AOL group. I was writing something about the spirituality of light, and I got an email back from this young man who said, who asked me a question about it. And he was the only one that responded to my email, or to my statement about the spirituality of light. And it turns out he was Indian. He had just been getting out of high school, going to college for film school. He's from southern India, and we just connected, and we started talking on the phone and emailing a lot. And I subsequently, I know his entire family. I visited him in India. He's
Oh,
visited
wow.
me here, and he was he. In fact, if you remember Life of Pi, there was a city called Pondicherry, and there was a house that Pi lived in Pondicherry, and it's southeast India, and that house was his grandfather's house.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, but I have people all over the world that I talk to,
That's awesome.
young
That's
and
got to be so
young and old.
rewarding to work with people and pass along your knowledge. And that probably means so much to them and for you.
Well, it does for me. I like it. It's very fulfilling, and that's one of the reasons I teach. Every semester I get new kids,
That's
and
awesome.
it's fun. It is fun. Thank you for asking me.
Steven, wow. The stuff that he had at the end, I had to leave it in there because we did talk about it. So I know there was like a little bit of dead air, but the fact that he got a Swiss Army knife from Blade Runner and then he kept the mannequin hand, which is so cool. And I just love when he was at Southern Illinois, he was in the class for underachievers, and look where he went. His career and what he's still doing today, and the fact that he lives in John Carpenter's house. So much fun. Steven, thank you. And now your homework Rocky 5. It's on HBO Max. You can rent it anywhere and everywhere. And man, this one has a lot to unpack. You know, the real ending that was supposed to be done, but John Avildsen and the studio was like, nope, we can't do that. I'm not going to tell you. You can look it up or just check out next week's sequel review of Rocky 5. So don't forget to review, rate, share our podcast. Follow us on all social media at Sequels Only. And don't forget to check out our website, sequelsonly.com. Good night.